microphone, make sure you guys can hear me. We have an awesome group here in Seattle, small and mighty. You guys braved the wind and the rain to be here, and we're really grateful that you guys are here. Thanks for coming out this evening. My name's Trevor Krogan. I'm general manager here at Open Square, and we have a great event planned for you this evening. We've got people joining us from all over the country. We have panelists from different parts of the region here, and we're really looking forward to a great conversation this evening about a topic that's near and dear to our heart here at Open Square, and personally has a ton of meaning to me. I am our general manager here, so I manage generally, but if you rewind 15 years ago, my history is as a classroom teacher. And I started my career as a classroom teacher. Third generation in education for me. So my grandfather was a coach and a teacher. Grandfather was actually born in Aberdeen, Washington here, and started his career as a coach and a teacher, and ended as a coach in his later years at the community college level. My dad was a middle school opportunity teacher, which was kids that, this is what they called it in California when we grew up, their very last step before being institutionalized. And so he worked with inner city kids. He did opportunity, is what they called it. And then he was a school administrator for the last 20 years of his career. And then I went into the classroom. I went into the family business for those first 5 years of my career, and spent 5 years as a middle school English and history teacher, as a high school coach. And I met my wife, who was a teacher at the time as well. So education is very personal. It's a family business for me. And it's the favorite part of my job at Open Square here. The work that we do with educators, the work that we do with students, and creating great spaces for teaching and learning. It's still where I have the most passion in my life, though I do a lot of other things professionally now. So I'm excited about the event. I'm excited about our panelists. I'm excited that all of you are here, and thanks for joining online. All right, so we're going to talk about mapping the future of education. That's a pretty big topic. I don't know that we'll solve that tonight. It would be great if we did, but hopefully we'll provide some frameworks and some things for you to think about in terms of where education is headed, and really specifically physical experiences and where people come together, and how we're thinking about creating great spaces and experiences for teaching and learning based on our experiences from the last few years as a society and as an industry of people who care about education. So that's the plan for the evening. We have some really bright and interesting people here, and we have a great audience, both virtually and in person. So you guys ready to get started?
Go.
All right. We are going to start this conversation by having a friend join us from Michigan. And I think Andrew, Kim, you're coming from Michigan, and are you here?
Yep. Hello.
Hey, it's good to see you. I'm going to point your direction so that I'm not awkwardly facing the other direction. Andrew Kim is a great friend of our organization, and he has immense experience. I'm going to give you just a little bit of biographical information for Andrew. But Andrew, thanks for joining us virtually, and we're excited to hear from you this evening. You want to say hello to our friends near and far here as we get started?
Yep. Hello from West Michigan, from Grand Rapids. It's great to be a part of the event this evening. Thanks for the opportunity to join.
All right, we're excited to have you, Andrew, and grateful that you were willing to spend your evening with us. So thanks for that. So let me tell you a little bit about Andrew, and then we're going to give Andrew about 15 minutes to share some of his thoughts, observation, and research from the great work that Andrew and the Steelcase team are doing. So just a little bit about Andrew. He's the director of North America Workspace Futures at Steelcase. So think about Andrew and his team as kind of SEAL Team 6 or the SWAT team with Steelcase. They're the ones that are out there thinking and learning and out on the edge of innovation and trends. And Andrew and his team do great work in that regard. He's responsible for applying human-centered design methods to support new market strategies and product development efforts. Andrew has researched widely, he's spoken widely, and he has more credentials than I could list, so I won't try. But we're big admirers and fans of Andrew. He's a great partner of ours, and we're excited to hear some of his thoughts around the work, observations, and research that are coming out of the Steelcase Workspace Futures team specific to education. So Andrew, excited to hear from you. Go ahead and take it away.
Great. Thanks for that introduction. So I'm going to share my screen. All right. You able to see that okay?
Yeah, we have you perfectly, Andrew. Thank you.
Great. All right. Well, thanks again for the opportunity to share some thoughts. I'll be sharing about immersive learning, but maybe just to provide a little bit more context as to how we decide to focus some of our activities around immersive learning. So I'm a part of the group Workspace Futures, which is a research innovation group that thinks about the future of work, learning, and healthcare. And as part of our group, we have a foresight practice. And as part of that foresight practice, we collect signals. And from those signals, we start to identify various forces. And then those forces come together to preferred futures that we begin to explore. And so you see here on the right some of the areas that we're exploring, social and collaborative learning, and looking at topics like project-based learning, thinking about learning and educator well-being, and looking at topics such as inclusive design, UDL, universal design for learning, and neurodiversity. And then we've been doing a dive into the digital transformation of learning. And we've been looking at topics such as blended and hybrid learning. And we've also been thinking more about AI and intelligent spaces, but we've also been looking at this topic of immersive experiences and thinking more about virtual reality and thinking about caves, virtual caves as well, and thinking what kind of impact that might have on the built environment. And so the central question for us has been, how might we reimagine the built environment to support immersive learning experiences? And as part of this exploration, we conducted both primary and secondary research. We did a literature review. We interviewed educators and students, and technologists, and we visited various campuses to kind of develop our point of view. And so one of the things that we had done through this work was to look at the different shifts in computing to understand kind of the impact each shift of computing has had on the physical space. And so with centralized computing, we know that there were hierarchical offices and rows and columns in schools. And we still see a lot of that today, but we've also seen some shifts in space. And so with the rise of personal computing, the spaces has had to adapt. In the offices, we saw the need to create big L-shaped desks to support the big monitors, the CRT monitors that were needed. And then there was the need for panels to route power and data. On school campuses, we saw the rise of computer labs and the need to create these spaces for students to be able to go to these spaces to learn more about the uses of computers, to learn how to program and use computers in their learning experiences. But then with the shift to mobile computing and the use of laptops, mobile phones, and tablets, we again have seen the need for the spaces on campuses and offices to adapt. And we saw the need to think more about power for mobile devices and having power within arm's reach and having power built into furniture. There was also a need with classroom desks to think more about the work surface and to create larger work surfaces to support the mobile devices, along with the water, books, and notebooks that students have. And even to think more about the ergonomics with these devices is with the rise of TechNet, and thinking about how might task seating be developed and students' desks to be designed with these mobile devices in mind. And now with this fourth shift in computing to ubiquitous computing and computing all around us, we expect to see other space typologies emerging, such as immersive meeting rooms, or on school campuses, VR zones and labs that I'll be sharing some more examples. But with each shift in computing, the space has had to adapt on school campuses. And so through our research, we identified 5 key principles to consider when designing the environment to support the teaching and learning experiences. And I'll kind of walk through each of these different principles and then share some examples of how those principles might be applied to the physical space. And so the first principle is safety. And this was paramount for all the educators that we talked to, that safety was a top concern, that when the students are wearing the VR headset, they're disconnected from the physical environment. And so there was a need to create spaces that help limit any kind of injury to the student. And so thinking about padded types of services. So we know that as individuals are using the VR headsets, their arms are moving around. And so how might we protect their hands as they're using the hand controllers? Or how might we create and think about the play area within the environment? How might we kind of define that space? And so there's this need for physical safety, but there's also a need for psychological safety, that when you have that headset on, it can be kind of awkward using it when others are looking at you. And so how might we even create a sense of psychological safety as students are using the devices? Or in the case of virtual caves too, we know that individuals can become nauseous from the use or from the movement of the content and information of the that's being displayed around the individual. And so how might we think about things like wind from fans, so that your mind isn't being confused between the movement that you see and you're standing still. And so things like a fan in the space can help with nausea in the space, in these kinds of spaces. The next kind of principle to think about is social learning. Learning is very much a social experience, but with the certain kinds of technology like the VR headsets, that can disconnect you from others that are around you. And how might we allow for others to be to connect into that experience through a spectator zone or through a secondary screen, as an example? Or how might educators think about the design of the teaching and learning activities? And so we heard of educators creating different roles for students. And so they had technology that VR headsets that would be shared within a group, and within that group there would be different roles. And so one of the users, one of the students might have the headset on, but another student might be the timekeeper, another student might be the safety monitor. And so there are ways to create different types of roles to create more social types of experiences with these types of technologies. So thinking about both kind of process as well as the physical space. The other principle to think about is content creation. And so technology allows individuals to have great experiences, but in some ways kind of passive experiences. And how might we allow students to have a greater sense of agency and be able to create content real time as they're viewing the content? And so what might be the areas that allow for not only the computer workstations, but the thinking zones, the collaboration zones, so students can begin to ideate and use speed of thought tools like whiteboards and Post-it notes to begin to think and ideate around the ideas they have for these virtual worlds. The next principle to think about is flexibility. And so with this technology, oftentimes students are experiencing the virtual worlds through the headsets for maybe a few minutes, for up to maybe 20 or 30 minutes. And so we know that it's one learning mode amongst many learning modes. And so how might a space support multiple learning modes, which includes immersive learning, but thinking about other types of learning modes like discussion or direct instruction. And so we know that as well, that space is at a premium, and the technology too is not inexpensive. And so how could the technology be shared amongst multiple classes, and thinking about ways to share that technology and then allow that class to be kind of modified, or to have the furniture move to support that VR experience that's needed. And then finally, this last principle, to think about storage and security. And so ways to store and lock the technology, but at the same time, what are ways to power the devices while they're being stored? We heard of one educator who would need to power 12 different headsets between classes in his office. And so how might storage be able to power devices, but also to think about things like disinfection. And so with headsets, sometimes there's a uneasiness about sharing the headsets with others. And are there ways to disinfect the headsets with UV light, as an example, while it's being stored? And so these are the five key principles to think about as you're thinking about the built environment for immersive experiences. And I'll show some examples of how to design space with these principles in mind. And so here's the first example. It's a K-12 classroom zone, and this space can support VR learning modes, but can also support other activities such as kind of group conversation. But it's, when it's being used for immersive experiences, you can see some of the affordances in this space. So things like the secondary display that's in the back allows for more social types of learning experiences. So the students who aren't in the headset can see what the student who has the headset is experiencing. But at the same time, adjacent to that secondary display, you can see areas for ideating, using the whiteboard to think about content creation, and then spaces, the workstation, kind of the mini workstation on the left, to allow students to use their computers to create the virtual worlds that they're experiencing. And then you see the furniture, which is fairly low. So this is keeping safety in mind, and the furniture is soft. You see round edges in this zone, this space in the classroom. And then you see the storage on the right with casters. And so this is a kind of VR in a box. And so you can take the VR headsets and move them from classroom to classroom as needed, but a very hard-working space to support immersive experiences as well as other types of activities. Another space to consider is this immersive learning corner. This could be in a library space or a shared space on a campus. And you can kind of see some of the key features of this space, the vertical planes, the PET, again, to support the safety of the individual as they're using their arms in the space, but also provides a sense of psychological safety and as others are maybe watching them, and so that they're less awkward with the headset on. And then you see on the floor carpet with varying textures that creates that sense of the play area. In the same ways that highways have rumble strips, the carpet can have different kinds of texture towards the perimeter to communicate to the student that they may be nearing the perimeter of the play area. And then there's a center area too with a different texture that allows students to know when they are in the middle. And then you can see here on the left, the spectator zone with the secondary screens for others to watch the experience. There's ability to kind of create content, and then storage on the left for the hardware. And so this is I think a space to consider, this immersive learning corner when you have limited space in a library or another shared area to support immersive learning. Another application to consider is this technology exploration hub. And so this is a multi-purpose space that allows students to learn more about various technologies, such as 3D printing, drone technology, as well as virtual reality. And in this space, you can see it's a very hardworking, multi-purpose type of space. And so it not only supports the VR experiences and allowing the furniture to be moved and nested when you need that larger play area, but it can also support other kinds of activities that you see on the right bottom in the inset image, that it supports. This space also supports group work. It can support workshops. It can also support presentations. So various types of activities. And then as it relates to the virtual reality experience, similar to the other applications, in addition to safety, there's the secondary display on the right to support more social types of learning experiences. Another area that we've been thinking more about our well-being moments. So we know that mental health is top of mind for schools, not only thinking about the well-being of students, but also the well-being of educators. And how might we create spaces to address some of the mental health issues that are top of mind? And this space can be used for multiple types of activities, group conversations, but it can also support virtual reality types of experiences. And you see the furniture is low to the floor, again, to support the safety, or the furniture can be moved to support more standing types of activities. But as far as the types of virtual reality experiences we can see here, we can imagine students are learning more about yoga or mindfulness techniques, with this types of technology. And so we think this is I think a really helpful technology to address some of the mental health issues that are needing to be addressed. And then finally, this last thought starter is thinking about more of a virtual cave, and thinking about content being enveloped around the learner. So we know that there are virtual headset types of experiences, but there's also the emergence of these cave types of experiences. And so we imagine our pods being used to support these types of experiences, which could be more social in some regards, because you don't have the headset. You can have conversations and eye-to-eye interactions with others that might be in the space with you. And we know that schools are thinking about multi-sensory types of experiences. And so there's opportunities to think about spatial audio in the space. And in some cases, schools are also experimenting with the use of a smell in these types of spaces to create truly a multi-sensory types of experiences. But with this pod, you see the adjacent spaces here on the left, which can support the ability for others to see the experience and create even more of an extended social connection and social learning experience. And then, but these spaces too can also support some of the creation and the content creation of these the worlds. And so this kind of back and forth between content creation and experiencing the virtual content is seen in this thought starter. So those are just a few examples of ways to think about space. So we are seeing that with each shift in computing, the physical space has had to adapt. And through our research, those key design principles can help in thinking about things to consider as you're designing your own immersive spaces. And hopefully the thought starters can help provide some inspiration and give you some ideas of how to think about some of the physical environments that you may want to create on your campuses. So with that, happy to answer any questions or to shift over to the panel.
All right, Andrew, really appreciate the thoughts. And something I should have said on the front end of the session tonight is this is one of our very favorite things about our partners at Steelcase and Smith System, is that they're doing this type of thinking. And certainly there's a lot of people who make great product to go into spaces, but the fact that Andrew and his team and our partners that we work with, who we truly consider to be partners, apply rigorous research and human-centered design to the problems that they're solving for, is what we love about these partners. So thank you for that. Andrew, just a couple thoughts and observations. Sure. And invite the rest of the panelists to come up and join us. And if you're willing, I think you're going to stick around for that panel as well, right? Okay, so we'll hold questions until the end. But a couple things I wrote down here. So I love the concept of braiding physical and digital. And I was thinking back to my time in the classroom as I was looking at some of your thought starters, and I'm a big believer in also braiding analog and digital within those spaces. And certainly there's a healthy place for digital experiences and virtual creation. What I liked about a lot of those spaces is that there's also a healthy analog aspect. So maybe talk a little bit about what you learned about a healthy blend of not just physical and virtual, but analog and digital within that physical space.
Sure. So the phrase I like to use is pencils and pixels, that there's a need for both the analog and digital. And as we think about the teaching and learning experiences, certain activities like ideation, it's helpful to have the speed of thought tools to quickly be able to have an idea and to be able to write that down. And I think too, in addition to the ability to kind of write down your thoughts quickly, that physical movement is also helpful in the learning spaces. So we know that sometimes with certain kinds of technologies, especially when you're on camera and like hybrid classrooms as an example, there's a tendency to be more fixed because you want to make sure you're within the camera. But how do you promote more movement through the space? And one way is through whiteboards and other types of analog tools like post-it notes. That movement is also helpful to have in these types of learning environments. So I think thinking about both the physical and digital is key, that we don't see the physical going away, the analog tools, and how might those continue. And so really to think about pencils and pixels.
I really like that. I hadn't heard pencils and pixels before, so I think that's a great way to think about it. I always think it's a miss when we over digitize spaces. We have to have a healthy consideration for technology in everything that we do, but I think we miss a lot when we fail to account for analog tools as well in the space. And I think where those two come together is really, really powerful. And I know that as we're rethinking the space that we're all in right now for our people and how they work, people want whiteboards still. They want to be able to visualize. They want to be able to express ideas in the way that their brain creates through their hands. And so I think it's important to consider both, not one or the other, but both together. So one other observation and question, and then I'll bring our other panelists up here. How are you and your team thinking about really what we've learned in the last couple of years? There have been, I was having an interesting conversation with one of our panelists before the event. We've certainly learned a lot about what didn't work in the last couple of years, and there have been, I think some real failures in terms of how we served our students over the last few years. But there were also some things that we learned that maybe just required further exploration that I would hate for us to leave behind. I think oftentimes we think in black and white, and gosh, remote learning was largely a failure. Yeah, there were a lot of challenges in it, but I think there's a huge risk in the wholesale leaving things behind that we had just started to explore over the last few years. So that was kind of a rambling thought, not really a question, but does any of that resonate with you? Making sure that we take the learnings from the last couple of years and build upon them, and don't just think about what's after the last couple of years, but how we can build upon the learnings from the last few years in education and in the world.
Yep. So I often think about humanizing the learning experience and how might we enhance learning through connection. I think that was what was needed during and I think what was realized a great deal, over the last few years. And so in all moments, and so whether it's through hybrid experiences and how might you create better audio, or how might you think about whiteboard technology with special cameras that allow the whiteboard content to be captured easily and shared. So, and then in terms of immersive experiences, that's why we often think about social experiences. How might we kind of make the connection to others? So it's not an individual experience that someone is having, but it's a shared experience amongst many. And so that's something that we think about. And the other thing I think a lot about is a sense of agency. How might we promote this sense of students being able to act on systems and really be the creators and the designers of the technology versus kind of just being a recipient of what the system is giving them and being kind of more passive actors. How might we allow them to be more active agents, so that they're actually creating the content, they're creating, even maybe programming some of the technology. And so that's what I think about as well. So humanizing the social connections and also creating a sense of agency.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Andrew, thank you again. Really appreciate you leading us off and giving us, I think, some great context to set the stage for the rest of the discussion. So thank you for that. So hang in there. I'm going to introduce our panelists now. We'll shift to the next part of the discussion. And we will start, and why don't you guys come on up here? We don't have to do the come on down moment, but I'll start by asking our virtual panelists to step forward. We're doing our best to walk the walk here and do this physical virtual thing. And we're doing it with our speaker, we're doing it with our panelists as well. So grateful for the two gentlemen to my left here, and also grateful for John Manwaring, who I can see on the screen there. And it looks like John is, I'm just going to guess based on the brick background and where you are, that you're on campus in Pullman right now. Is that right, John?
Yep, I'm here on the Pullman campus in the Spark building, which is on kind of the southwest side of the campus. Glad to be a part of this wonderful topic.
Yeah, well, we're excited to have you virtually, and thanks for joining us. John is the Assistant Director for Learning Innovations at WSU, Washington State University. John, that's a really cool title, by the way. I'm a fan of people who have titles that nobody else holds, and my guess is you're the only one with that title at Washington State. Is that right?
I believe so, yeah.
Anyway, fun fact, every job I've ever had at this company, I made the title up for it, including my current one. There was nobody in it before, so I'm a fan of that. We're going to hear more about some of the really interesting work that John is doing at WSU, Go Cougars, including the Technology Test Kitchen, Spark Building, and WSU Creative Corridor. So John's doing some really interesting work, and he and his team are thinking about space in ways that I really appreciate and admire. So we're happy to have you, John.
Thank you.
All right. To my left, we have Steve Murakami, and Steve is the associate principal at Huddeball and Aremus. Did I get it?
You did.
Yes, I wrote it down. Huddeball and Aremus. That was the toughest part of my pronunciation tonight. And they're an architecture firm that, again, we are big fans of the way that you and your team think about how people come together in physical space. He's a client-centric leader who's committed to bringing people together to leverage best practices and resources and create student-centered educational experiences and environments. He began his career working primarily on K-12 architecture, and he branched into owners' capital projects and rounded out his experience by representing various owners across Washington State. He's full circle now, back into architecture to bring an owner's lens to the design process. So thanks for the good work that you do, and thanks for joining us in person this evening, Steve.
Thanks for the invitation to be here.
All right. And then last but not least, we have Dennis Purcell. Dennis is the Director of Remote and Blended Learning at Federal Way Public Schools. How common is that title, Dennis? Are there a lot of
That
peers?
also got created during that.
Yeah.
I'm also known as the Director of R&D.
Not a lot of directors of R&D. in
R&D.
Oh, R&D. Okay, rhythm and blues.
That's right.
That is awesome. So yeah, Dennis comes with a background that didn't start in education, and that has a pretty well-rounded, business perspective and point of view around people and technology. He's got 20 plus years of experience working with schools, both in K-12 and higher education, as an educator and a consultant. He has a customer-focused approach. It's resulted in revenue growth for big companies, and also dynamic learning experiences. So
Actually, my background is very similar to yours.
Oh,
My
is it?
family
Tell me
business
more
was
about it.
education too. I started in the Marine Corps, then the classroom.
oh wow.
I met my wife in the classroom.
Did
My
you really?
mom
Oh,
was
we're
a
gonna have
teacher.
a beer after this.
We're gonna have to do that. My dad, my
Oh,
father
I
was an
it's
educator,
right
so-
over there.
Yeah, so very similar, and went to the private sector and now back in school. So a lot of learning that's now led me to this. Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah.
I love being here with my man, Steve. He's created some of the most amazing learning spaces that I've been in.
Yeah.
Very student-centered and also centered on the purpose of the instruction center.
That's fantastic. Well, this is a great panel, and I'm excited for the conversation. So let's go ahead and jump in. I'll be doing my job well if I let you guys talk to each other, because we have some really bright, talented people who are doing work across a range of spectrums here. So I'd love first to have you guys provide some comments or observations about some of the thoughts that Andrew shared with us. So things that I certainly thought were compelling, but I'll open it up to the group. what are some of your questions, observations, or insights based on what Andrew shared to kick us off?
I'll start. Over the progression, when you look back 20 or 30 years, we talked, the sage on the stage. And then about 10, 15, 20 years ago, we were the guide on the side looking at how teachers could help instruct and guide a student through their journey. And I think what Andrew presented today is kind of the next generation of the teacher as the CX person, the customer experience. I like to think of schools as businesses because we're trying to attract students. The more students we can bring in, the more offerings we can provide. And so you see school districts actually competing with other school districts, especially around the fringe. When a new school pops up, you see students leaving that district. And so we need to be competitive. We need to offer a good product. And I think as we start thinking about the role of the teacher and how we engage students authentically, we have to be designing experiences that compete with all the digital platforms that surround and wrap them 24/7, and thinking about new ways to engage kids in their learning.
Yeah, Steve, that's really interesting. I've never heard anybody refer to an educational leader or a teacher as a CX function. And that's a cool concept. Other thoughts, Dennis, John?
Yeah, a lot of the things that you said, Andrew, around those 5 areas, that social learning. One of the things that I would bring to now doing what I'm doing to anyone designing these spaces is referring people to the instructional frameworks, which are our documents that describe what the great instruction is. And in a better way, we use a framework from the Center for Educational Leadership, the 5 dimensions out of University of Washington. And you'll hear educators throwing out alphabet soup. They'll say cell 5D. It's our framework. And in that, there is a criterion around classroom environment and culture. And as a district, as we're coming out of now 2 years out of the pandemic, the criterion we're focusing on is learning routines. And Andrew, you talked about student agency. If you look at our framework, it's a rubric. And exemplary is where student agency, the locus of control, is really around students. So creating spaces where learning routines, the space is predictable, students know how to use the space, and it's us teaching students how to use the space. So I like that, what you said about social learning, that those routines around social learning, how it works, are big. Something else you brought up, and that makes me think of something, John, I'm really curious to hear about from you, is the idea of blended learning. And I'm glad you brought up universal design. That's like a foundational idea of what we're trying to do in education. But blended learning is, and this is from Katie Novak and Dr. Catlin Tucker, UDL and blended learning. It's active engaged learning online and active engaged learning offline. So the analog and digital, pencil and the pixels, I like that. And what I've heard at the D school is low res and high res, prototyping. So it's active engaged learning online and active engaged learning offline to provide students with control over time, place, pace, and path. So how can, in those spaces, we do that in order, and this is what, I just came from 2 days, and I have 2 more days next week of meetings with principals, ground level knowledge, street data, saying what they need. And they're trying to achieve small group in tier 1 instruction, and how can the spaces lend themselves to that? And I'm really curious about, as we prepare them for post-secondary, John, what that looks like in your space. I'm really curious about that title and what that space looks like at Washington State.
Sure. Yeah, no, this is, I love meetings like this because I feel like I finally found my people. So I really appreciate that. I really appreciate you bringing up the framework also, because I think that's an important piece of this that kind of helps give us a trajectory. The thing that I feel like has become really important, as we've kind of emerged from, a forced opportunity to experiment with different teaching modes is to really try to sift the wheat from the chaff on that. And there's a lot of good wheat in there. And the part of that I think is critical is to use these lessons learned and then map those to the framework. And one of the things that we've been really working towards for a while, and it's wonderful to see some of these things manifest in design, is look at UDL manifested in that built space. And then the other part of that on the other end that we hear about quite often with students, and usually we hear about it, in the form of critique of their professor, is why are we in this space? So mapping your framework to the why of where you're choosing to meet is, I think, a really important part of that. And these things are really sort of in contention with how the university wants to work. The registrar wants to schedule a class. The class has so many people that will fit in X room. What are the amenities in the room? If you're not going to use those pieces of that space, that learning space every time, we're going to start to see students really react negatively to that. Particularly if you're in a technology-rich space and the faculty chooses to use the majority of that time in more of that analog mode. So I think that we've got a little bit of work to do ensuring that we're tightly in lockstep with our faculty and instructors in ensuring that they're using the space effectively, that they feel like they're prepared to use it effectively, so that when the students arrive, they're ready to engage in the ways that they think will make sense. And what they think makes sense may not always jive with what the faculty wants to do, but they've come from a time when they can jump into any class they want and it's virtual, and they can do that, at the coffee shop, or they can do it sitting in their room alone. So I think it'll be important for us to identify rich spaces that are able to do the things that are mapped to the learning outcomes and do it very purposefully. So we see that a little bit here, and I know others are struggling with that as well.
Well, Andrew, I gave everybody an opportunity to respond to what you said. It would be unfair not to let you respond to the responses. So there was a lot there, but was anything that stuck out from conversations from or comments from our other panelists?
Similar to your comment, it's interesting to hear your thoughts about schools as a business and how to attract students, and thinking about the role of the experience officer at the schools. And so there's these virtual experiences, but also just to think about kind of the experience overall at a campus. It's great to hear the interest in the area of UDL that we're beginning to explore more. And I think these types of technologies allows some of the choice that students can be offered in terms of the experience. And I also think there's ways to think about equity in this conversation as well with these technologies, that in some cases not all students may be able to travel or have certain types of experiences, and this allows students to have potentially a broader range or certain types of experiences that they might normally not have, given their set of circumstances. So, but I think I really appreciate also the conversation around teaching and learning. So for us, we often think about the framework of pedagogy, space, and technology. And it always starts with pedagogy, and then how does the space and technology support the teaching and learning goals for the outcomes that are intended. And so not starting with technology or space, but really starting with the teaching and learning goals.
Yeah, please do.
So Andrew, that's timely. We're working on a middle school right now where we've thrown out the program, and we've started with, let's brainstorm all the activities you would ever want to do with your students and figure out what kind of amenities and what kind of group sizes drive those activities, and then to wrap those activities with space, and then to start figuring out what adjacencies are required between those spaces. And it's been a really provocative way to think about schools, and getting out of that double-loaded corridor mentality, but thinking about how do we want to group people together and what kind of activities do we want to do. So there are school districts thinking about this. They're kind of unicorns right now, but they are.
That's amazing.
We have excitement in the chairs, people jumping out of their chairs. Actually, on that note, I want to reference something John said earlier. I love conversations like these because in some way, John talked about the idea of finding his people. I'm feeling some of that here as well. And in some ways, this feels like a motivational speech, and I want to jump out and make some of this stuff happen. Along those lines, John also talked about some of the challenges that are in place. He talked about Office of the Registrar and, legacy thinking around how we assign space. Some of that is unique to higher education, but that idea of legacy mindset and other obstacles that get in the way of some of these things that I think to a lot of us who think this way are like, this is logical stuff. Let's do it fast. Let's be innovators. Let's be design thinkers and start implementing now. It's not that easy in the real world. What are some of those challenges that get in the way that you guys are running into every day in your work?
Well, like I said, I just came from school improvement plan meetings with principals. And tied to what you said, John, about what's the objective. When I was in technology for 10 years, I always loved the question that if an educator asked, well, can it do this? Here's the can it do this that we're facing in a federal way. I'll give you a profile of our district. We're about 21,000 students. We're the 5th most diverse district in the country. We have a lot of newcomers. In classrooms, we have up to some 7-10 languages spoken other than English, first languages in the home. And a principal brought up this term. I had to look it, I had to Google it. He says, talking about social learning, I need student talk, part of our framework, to be translanguaging. Meaning students who are coming where English is not their first language, come with their own set of assets and brilliance, and language is the barrier. So how do those spaces lend themselves to immediate access to accurate academic language, not nuanced? And we're doing that now with, we're using PowerPoint Live, which does live transcription, not in Dari or Persian Afghan, which is a large part of our population. And so how do we have those conversations? And using blended learning, that might be a center in the room where there's 1 or 2 computers. And teachers always say, I wish I could clone myself. Well, one of the things that came out of the pandemic that was positive was our learning management systems. I could have a Canvas page that has a video of the educator giving a prompt. And I could have teach a learning routine around how students could drive conversation around this. And our multilingual students could have think time and type in an answer, one-click translate the prompt. How do we make that even more seamless in the space? And with artificial intelligence, I'm sure it's around the corner to make that translanguaging experience in the space. How could the space support that?
I had a timer going to see how long it took us to get to artificial intelligence. It was a while. Almost every conversation these days touches upon that. And let's get there a little bit more later. I really appreciate, those challenges of a diverse population. They are great, but it's really cool to hear about some of the ways that you're handling those challenges. Other challenges that you're running into, Steve, Andrew, John.
One of the things so I went from architecture to Tacoma Public Schools. And I was at the time a bit disenfranchised. The districts weren't really valuing what a facility could do to facilitate education. They had a very traditional, as an architect, I was given three ring binders that measured a foot tall and it told me every finish, every length of cabinet, every wall, what it needed. But there was no beauty, there was no relationship, there was no human aspect of it. And so I got there in 2012, and in 2013, we passed a $500 million bond. And instead of jumping right into projects, we spent a year with a full architectural team and we wrote a book. And we wrote a book of all the questions we need to be asking when we're thinking about designing a school. It was very open-ended and it had concepts like asset map around the school to figure out what's not working and what's working, and what is, embrace it, what's not, scaffold it, and bring those things in. Like one of the schools that was under construction right when I landed was an elementary school. And across the street was Wheelock Library. And it was a Tacoma Public Library that was dwindling population. It was lacking people coming in. So I was asking the question, why don't we build the bridge across the street to literally connect that and not have to spend, $1.5 million building a library. I can spend that somewhere else very easily. So as we start thinking about community mapping and asset mapping, we started thinking differently. It was a disruption to that status quo. And we did an addition for Wilson High School, where there's a ton of glass in this office. I love your office, by the way. But we designed operable glass walls in every classroom. And after the first week, every single inch was covered in posters. And teachers weren't gonna let you look. The teachers aren't gonna let you look at what they're doing over their shoulder. And I think, as much as I'm very pro-union. I love teacher support. I love union support of trying to get rights. But one of the things that really disenfranchised me from being on the school side was the fact that adults are making decisions on what's best for adults and not kids first. And it drove me insane. My little school fairy architect wings were clipped almost every day. Trying to think about, we should be thinking about students first. And that tidal wave of trying to get change to happen is so hard when you're entrenched in politics. And when I left Tacoma, I went to work at Lake Washington School District, a very socioeconomically high district that had a lot of resources. And it was even harder to innovate there because the unions would say, well, if those guys get this, we need to have it everywhere. So the leadership team was, you can innovate, but you just have to tell me how to do it at every school at once. And that's a really hard challenge to innovate in that way.
That's an interesting, I like what you're saying there. And I can tell you, I've run into something similar here at the university where it seems like every college here at the university feels like they need to have their own little thing, right? They need to have their own classrooms. They need to have their own maker space. They need to have their own, and so we have like this massive duplication of services across the university, just even here on the Pullman campus. And one of the things that we did that undermines that is we created a transdisciplinary team in those maker spaces. And we said, well, how many 3D printers do you have? Do you have a laser cutter? Do you have a forge? Do you have this? And then let's advertise that as a collective. And then let's invite students in by creating specific projects. These would be extracurricular to start with, to invite them in. And let's fortify that with funding that we pool together. And so we've got this interesting group that spans from engineering to fine arts to comm to apparel merchandising, where we share these resources. So it's not uncommon for somebody that's trying to figure out how to 3D print some sort of notions for a garment down in the engineering space. And it's not uncommon for the engineers to try to coordinate when they can pour bronze with the fine arts folks. What's been really fascinating about that is the students got to drive it, because we said, well, let's do a bunch of extracurricular projects. It'll be fun. And so we identified some fun things. And then after that, we started getting these faculty saying, well, what if I want to have my microbiology student 3D print a virus on a shirt? And then we were able to say, we have a pathway to do that. So the bridge building is critical to have in place, map those resources, and then extend the invitations. And at least at the university, it's a great way to thwart the bureaucracy by using the student energy to kind of break it down.
I really, really like those thoughts. That made me think of, you're crowdsourcing some of those solutions, and there's almost a shared economy piece of that too, instead of that scarcity mindset of, I'm going to hold the things that I've invested in that are owned by my department or my team and make sure that we only have access to them, opening up those resources to everyone. That's really smart and inspiring. I had a second part to this question, and one of the things I'm already loving about this panel is that the second part was going to be, so how do we solve for some of those challenges? You guys came with challenges. and how you're dealing with them. And that's encouraging and inspiring to me, because that's how we need to think in education. It can't just be about all the big rocks that we have a hard time moving up the hill every single day. Frankly, it's one of the reasons I left the classroom and moved into another part of impact in education, is that I had a really hard time with people complaining about the challenges all the time. I wanted to work on solutions. And I love that you guys both framed the challenges, all of you, and then said, here's some ways we're dealing with that. So I don't know if you want to add to that, but that was my follow-up question. How are you handling some of these challenges? How are you moving past them? And do you have ideas for each other? And when we have a group like this together, was there a challenge that you heard? Do you have an idea that you might be able to share with somebody else in the panel here?
I'll start. John, you may or may not represent the unicorn I've been looking for. So I've always been on the facility side, the brick and mortar side of schools. And so I see us as the hardware, and I see the human element as the software. And oftentimes we're designing systems that don't work together, because like the open plan of the 70s didn't mesh the hardware and the software. And I'm a part of A4LE, which is an organization that brings the architects, educators, planners together, contractors, industry partners, everybody, to talk about how do we do these great schools. And one of our focal missions has been, how do we connect to colleges of education who are teaching the teachers how to teach? Because for me in architecture school, it was all theoretical, philosophical, it was line weights and beautiful drawings. And then you get into the real world and holy cow, I knew nothing, right? And it was just a total, I was not prepared to enter that workforce, and it was a wild journey. But I'm wondering what it's like to teach a teacher and how they think about space. And I was at Tacoma, we had the same 5D framework, the cell framework. And there was one little metric that got measured about how the teacher uses the physical space. And I hung on that thing like a little rock climbing bull the entire time I was there, trying to say place matters. If you haven't seen the book, The Third Teacher, it's brilliant. It's one of those books that talks about patterns and asks a lot of questions and makes you think deeper and broader than you would have. But how do we teach the teachers how to use space, and how are teachers being taught to engage students? And there's the stereotype of, we have a lot of gray-haired teachers. Tacoma had, I don't know, we had 5,000 employees, and there were, 1,000 that were a year or two away from retirement. And so what do you do? Is that a hopeful glimmer? But I've seen some of the older teachers adapt quicker to technology than some of the younger. So the stereotypes aren't necessarily true. And there's a guy named Ian Jukes. There was a Canadian football player turned teacher, turned administrator, turned disenfranchised. I'm a push against the stream. And he does this podcast, and he's spoken at A4LE, and he does this thing, the committed sardine. And at the Monterey Aquarium, there are sardines that swim by the thousands in this huge tube. But there are dozens that swim against the current. And that's his whole drive. And he referenced this study that I actually had to look up to see if it was true, but 3 chimpanzees in a cage with podiums of bananas. And if they touched one, the shock collar got all 3. Okay. So they quickly learned, don't get bananas from that call. And after a week, they take one of the monkeys out, they put a new one in. When that new monkey goes to get that banana, the others beat him down. And by a month later, there's never been a monkey in the cage that actually got shocked, but they all know they can't touch that banana. And that was his story of him entering as a bright-eyed, energized teacher and getting beat down by the other teachers that, oh, slow down, that's not the way we do it here. So I've always been wanting to see behind the curtain to the software side, to figure out how do we get adults to make decisions for students first? How do we get adults to embrace this idea of being open and engaging and use space in different ways? So that was a lot. I apologize for all that. John,
No, that's great. And I mean, this is a continual discussion that we have, and we need buy-in at several levels. The default, I think the fish example illustrates it quite nicely. There's always going to be a few faculty that are just willing to do it, to swim against the current, and we, as innovators and technologists, we latch onto them and then we use them up. We use every last piece of energy that they've got to offer, and eventually they get burned out. It is also the case that I think it is not necessarily rewarded to engage in some of these innovative things. You know, does it count towards T&P, the tenure and promotion? I sat just a few weeks ago, I sat through our new faculty orientation, which is, it's like a 6-hour Zoom call now with all the new faculty that have been hired. And they spent, I would say, all of maybe 20 minutes of that entire day talking about, and these are the resources available to you if you want to do, you know, such and such with in your classroom. So it's a challenge, and prioritizing against all the things that they're being asked to do is a challenge, and ensuring that when they do come and work with us, that it counts towards their T&P process is a critical component. So we spent a lot of time working in the provost's office, which is the chief academic officer for the university, to talk about how can we ensure that these things are baked into that process so that when they're getting reviewed, that these things qualify as part of that. And then the other piece of that is really to find any and all opportunities we can to incentivize those faculty. We offer stipends to faculty, and I mean, it's almost sad. They don't even need to be large stipends. It's amazing what will incentivize somebody to engage in this. You know, almost like a friendly, hearty handshake and let's meet on Monday and I'll buy you a coffee will just about get you there. And they really deserve so much more. But it's a continual piece of the process that we're working on, and we have to work on it at the provost's office, with the at the dean level and at the chair level, and then we try really hard to grab them right when they come in the university, so that they feel like they can be a part of something and work on that, and that will count.
But and to that point, John, about the importance of matching measures with kind of the strategic goals of the institution. I was talking to a professor at a state school here in Michigan, and he was part of this faculty committee, and they spent a year meeting to try to improve teaching and learning at their institution. And after a year of meetings, they ended up making one recommendation to the school, and a change in kind of the faculty kind of handbook. And that was the one change they made, was that research related to teaching and learning applied to tenure. That before that, any type of research that the school or that the faculty was involved in had to be related to their discipline, but anything that was teaching and learning related did not count towards tenure. But that's the one change that they had recommended, and with the goal of trying to improve teaching and learning on their campus.
That sounds familiar.
All right, well, gosh, we could go a really long time, but I want to make sure to be respectful of your time and our audience here. I'm going to ask one more question. I'm going to just open that up to all of you, and then we're going to open up Q&A. And again, one of the things I'm really liking about what's happening on the stage is that I'm seeing potential opportunities for partnership emerging. You called that out. You know, thank you guys for being countercurrent sardine swimmers, and thank you for grabbing bananas in the face of potential electrical shock. Talk to me about one thing you're working on right now, with your partners in your practice or in your district or at your institution, that you're really excited about, that you want people to know about, or that you could maybe use some help or partnership with. Let's see if we can get something going here. So just think of one thing that you're really excited about, that you either want people to know about and explore further, or that you could use some help advancing.
I'm going to go right to something that Andrew brought up in his keynote, which is universal design for learning. It's something we've been focusing on for many years. And the definition of that for us is providing multiple means for our students, our adults, to engage in learning, that it's not just one way. multiple means for them to demonstrate their learning, and then multiple means to communicate it. And think about the implications for spaces. We design spaces, universally designed spaces. Is the space providing multiple means for doing that? And one thing I loved about what you did, Steve, is when you designed those spaces, you created like an intent. Because people walking, I taught it up the hill there at a school called Stanislaus, open area school, beautiful. The students saw adults interacting all the time. People came in, a principal left, and they forgot what the intent of the space was for providing how it could be leveraged to provide multiple means for engaging, small group, big group. So universal design, to get familiar with that, understand it, and what is the impact it has on what's happening with teaching and learning and on students.
I would say that, so my 14-year-old daughter is a first-time freshman. She started school freshman year this year. And she's at the newest Bellevue High School. State of the art, it's got glass blowing, it's got everything. And the new innovative policies that they did this year were, they stripped all the shared learning of any furniture so that no students can congregate outside of class. And they instituted cell phone garages at every door, so that when you go into an educational space, you have to drop your personal computer, your personal camera, everything that you can do on that device. You have to put it in a garage because you're not allowed to access it. It's too disturbing to, the other students. So when we start thinking about all these new technologies and as teams come and go, when that school opened, my son was the first freshman class in that school. And walking through that school and seeing the collaborative spaces, seeing all the activity happening outside the four walls of the classroom, I was so happy to see this because they were finally getting it right. And then that principal left after a year, went on to a different school, new principal comes in, and all of it's gone. And it's just so disheartening. So for everybody here, I would say keep fighting the good fight and keep swimming against that current, because my 26 years in this K-12 world has been trying to figure out what's the best vantage point to create change. And it is tough. The influences against us are right there everywhere. So just keep fighting.
But I think memorializing it, as you did, is at least
Yeah.
a step.
Yeah, so one of the things we did in our new schools is we designed in all this innovation. And one of the things Tacoma did that was fantastic is we actually had teachers working as TOSAs, teachers on special assignment, in the Capitol office that were throughout the design process, and then were stationed at that school for a year. And they helped bridge and get the teachers to figure out, this is how you use this space, this is how you use this technology. And we ended up starting creating books to memorialize that. So every teacher got not only what does this device on the wall do for you, but here's all the spaces around you, here's how you can take education outside. Supervision is huge as we're starting to create the DNA of typical classrooms, of the 30-foot square box. Those days I'm hoping are behind us as we start to create spaces that look more like a Starbucks or your office, of being able to, where's a place for 1, where's a place for 5, where's a place for 25. It's not a classroom, it's a learning environment. They're all interconnected. We're trying to create books so that that legacy moves forward with the buildings.
It's the why that, John, you were talking about.
Really appreciate those thoughts.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Making sure that there's a thread between generations or phases of people who come in and out of those spaces. We're designing spaces that are 50-year spaces, and there's a lot of different users that come through. So how do you keep that continuous thread of intent through? I really like that. John or Andrew, what are you excited about? What are you working on?
Well, I can tell you something that I'm working on that I'm excited about, but I'm struggling with. We decided to embrace AR, VR, XR, in a pretty big way in the last 12 months. We invested in hardware and some software platforms. And which is cool. And I think there's students are ready to engage on that. They don't seem fearful on that. Faculty want to do some things with that. We want to solve some specific problems. one is in a biology course, and one is in apparel merchandising. The struggle that I'm finding right now is it appears to me that the hardware capability is really quite a bit further ahead of the content that's available. The content that we're finding is weak. And when I say weak, it's just it's not fun. It tends to highlight the aspects of the hardware that are cool, but it doesn't necessarily allow you to really sort of generate content in and of itself. So we're trying to find ways, and I think Andrew, you referred to this in your discussion, that to allow the students to gen content themselves, and how can we sort of leverage the students' capabilities and their willingness to create and innovate, and kind of steer that back into what is available, to achieve the learning outcomes that we're hoping for.
All right, Andrew, to make sure we've got time for some questions, give us your last
Right.
thoughts on that final question.
Well, it's great to hear the interest in UDL. So there is a UDL project that we're working on with a design firm. We're working with a local school to compare a traditional classroom with a UDL inspired classroom. And we spend a year planning this research activity, and to make sure that the school was on board, that the teachers were on board, and to submit the IRB proposal. And so all the planning has been done, and we're finally collecting the data starting this week. So I'm excited to see kind of the influence that space may or may not have with the UDL activities that are occurring at this school, and what's the impact on learning, on kind of the teachers' behaviors, and with the changes that have been made to the space. So I know that there's lots of research that's been in UDL. There's maybe less research on kind of how space can help or be an affordance to the UDL activities in the classroom space. So that's a current project that I'm excited about, because after a year of planning, we're finally starting to collect the data.
Right. Well, that's there are a lot of common threads between the folks in this group, and I hope we can continue some of those conversations. So this time's gone really quickly. Let's make sure we have an opportunity to give our audience a chance to ask some questions. So if you're online, you can certainly type those in the chat, and then we'll open it up to folks who are here in the room right now. You've got 4 experts in their respective domains. What are you curious about? What did they share that made you wonder something? Yeah, go for it, Dave.
Yeah, Trevor, you mentioned that a lot of our school buildings are 50-year plus. The things that go inside them are maybe 20 to 25-year plus. That's a blessing and a curse. We build things to last. But as we look around the state, we're starting to see some school refreshes being funded by bonds in the K-12 arena. Some of our higher education institutions are going back into some of those older classrooms. What I'm seeing in many cases is we're putting new stuff in, but are we really stepping back to think about what should be happening in those spaces? And if it's per the provost or the registrar, it's a 48-seat classroom that's racked and stacked. Should we be thinking about that space being maybe a little bit more flexible space, lower head counts? Maybe it should be a 30 or 35 seat. How do we change how space is being looked at in some of those existing buildings?
For our virtual panelists, were you able to hear that, or should I restate? Okay, you guys are able to hear. Great. All right, I'll open it up to the panel.
I'll start. So I worked with the Kent School District last year on a bond concept, and I left their team in September. They went for their bond vote in February and failed miserably at like 40%. But I thought we had a cool idea going, that they weren't going to build any new buildings, but it was a district-wide refresh. And the concepts we came up with are, a lot of schools have the 100 square foot little storage rooms, right? And so we started talking about that as a place for 1 or 3. And we started talking about classrooms as a place for 20. We started thinking about where could we put an operable wall to make a space for 40 or 50. And then the language we were using is by the number of people, and it was wet or dry. And so they're trying to create a flexible place with the mantra that the building won't get in the way, something that was stolen from Rod Leland at Federal Way School District, who was before your time. But the idea that the building doesn't get in the way of what the end users want to do in it. And so they knew they couldn't knock down buildings, rebuild a new comprehensive high school is going to cost you $300 million. A lot of school districts can't afford that in a bond. And so they were trying to think creatively about, okay, we have the bones are okay. Let's do the refresh with new finishes and let's energize and make people proud to come back to these schools, because some of them were really sorry, old, forlorn buildings. So trying to think about how to use your money wisely and think about how to think flexibly about how to use spaces and defining a language where, again, something I think you said, or Dennis, that every space has to do 2 or 3 functions. And it has to be super flexible and it has to be super easy. So that's where I would start.
We've run into this recently where we're doing something very similar to what you described. We're trying to identify opportunities to reinvest in the core of campus and maybe divest ourselves of less desirable classroom space. And that's stressful particularly to the scheduling process. So what we've done is invest in ways that we can simulate and ask the what if questions. So what if we turn this into an active learning room and we lose half the seats? Is there still space in the schedule and in the time block that we're obligated to report to the state that we can still fit those other things? And by presenting those simulations with our what ifs in there, we've been more successful in at least having those ideas entertained, and then of course then we can worry about the funding part of it. But I think it's important to be able to take the data that you have and be able to simulate with it.
Really appreciate
Sure.
those thoughts. Go ahead, Andrew.
Oh, I was just going to mention, so Sharon Beaudry, who's a professor at Oregon Tech, she was a Steelcase Learning fellow during her sabbatical time recently. And the research she was conducting was looking at what are the factors or scaling factors that lead to the increase in active learning classrooms on a campus. And she was comparing various schools where there were, all the schools started with active learning pilots, but certain schools chose to scale active learning across their campus, and then others did not. And so she was trying to understand what were those different scaling factors, and she identified and I think 12 or so kind of scaling factors, but kind of looking at it through a change management lens. And so some of the things that you would expect, the importance of having a leader, having the cross-functional team that includes the registrar and other functional leads like the technology department, and thinking about professional development, which John, I know you had mentioned, and just thinking about the educators' kind of mindset too, and maybe kind of related. There's some interesting work that University of Melbourne has been doing. They have a research initiative, ILETC, for innovative learning environments and teacher change. And so this multi-year effort to understand how do you get teachers on board, because classrooms are often like high performance spaces, or like a high performance sports car maybe. And in order to maximize the use, you have to really understand kind of the capabilities. And there's, even though it seems simple, furniture should be pretty straightforward and intuitive, what we've learned is that's not always the case, that there needs to be some sort of instruction to educators to understand how the space, the furniture could align to their pedagogical goals. But I think looking at kind of change through an organizational management lens and thinking about these different scaling factors can help increase or scale active learning within a campus.
Right, we probably have time for one more, given the thoughtful nature of our responses here. So you've been ready to jump out of your seat for a half hour.
I like this conversation. It's good.
So
I like
I'm not going to make the mistake of not giving you a chance to ask the questions.
I know, so education's my world, I like it, and I'm a Coug, so John's my guy here.
Go Cougs!
So I actually picked up on a lot of things that all of you touched on, and it sort of was shaping this question in my mind. So we talked about social connection as being one of the outcomes of the research study as an important design principle. I heard Trevor, you talk about what we've learned over the last couple of years and not losing that, but learning from it and building on it. And then Steve, you're talking about your daughter as a freshman in school. So I was talking to educators at a K through 12 over on the east side, and one of the things that really surprised them when we all came back together in space was the impact that that lack of social connection and learning had on the students coming into school, the kindergarten, the first graders, and I thought about it, and that I would love to hear if you guys have seen that and if that's had any impact on your space and how you're handling it, because I know that it's really affecting my world and my daughter, who was part of that class, but also with high school, you know, I think about the high school experience, and really that's helping prepare you for those who go on to higher education. There's sort of that transition through the high school years to go into the education, and some of those missed kind of those last couple of chunks. My son was one that graduated virtually, and so I'm curious to see, if you guys are experiencing that in K through 12 and what you're doing to address it. And John, to you, and once they come into higher education with your freshman class, are you guys seeing, might be a year out from that, but did you see any challenges that came out of that lack of social connection or that learning that naturally comes? I think it was underrated before, and now we're really understanding what a huge impact that has, and that needs to be a focused part of learning.
Yeah. So when students came back, just think about this, they were gone for essentially 2 years. So a sixth grader going to our middle school, that's when our middle school starts. They were fourth grader, and now they're in a middle school. Ninth graders were like sixth grade middle school students, and now they're in a high school campus. Freshmen at Washington State University who had been remote were sophomores. So yes, they had lacked connection, and they had forgotten how to interact and how to deal with conflict. And they all had one of these, and conflict was percolating from this. So what we've doubled down on, and each of our principals who just presented, and will present next week, have 2 goals they're setting. And we have a strategic plan around that. One goal is around our goal 2 in federal way, which is around whole child. That's how do you teach those skills on how do you interact again, and how do you do that in a digital landscape? And then they also have an academic goal. So yes, it has to be retaught, how to be together again, how to be in halls again. So yeah, we saw it for sure.
And I would just say,
Same lessons to adults. You go, I mean, get on an airplane.
adults are so much worse.
Go ahead, John.
I really feel like we did see that, where students come back and there was this kind of weird awkwardness, but I feel like I'm a glass half full kind of person. So I feel like they're a bit elastic, and they have snapped back into wanting and thriving in those social environments. And for our spaces, that what I see is the informal learning areas that are adjacent to classrooms are critical. And I mean, yeah, there's a lot of stuff that happens there that relates to social, interactions. And yeah, their devices are on all the time, even though they're with people. But I feel like those informal learning spaces are a critical ingredient to the student success. It's sad to hear that was removed from space in that high school that your son or daughter goes to, but those are important spaces. There's a lot of learning that happens there, and there's a lot of that spillover opportunity between student and their instructor that happens there too. I think about when I was in college, we had opportunities where we went to social functions with our instructor, sometimes went to their house. I don't think that ever happens anymore. I think that for a lot of different reasons, that's just not where it's happening. It's happening in digital space, and it's happening in incidental space. So I think we've got to have that space, and it's part of the overall classroom plan that we put in place here. We are very purposely looking at how they're furnished, how they're used, how can we possibly measure the use? And I'll go back to AI. We've got security cameras scattered throughout our building. And the first thing that we did when the students started coming back is we started asking, what is the algorithm or the tool that we can use with those cameras that will help us count those students that are wandering about? Not because we're worried about what they'll do, because that'll happen anyway, but we're worried about that they're here in their presence and that we can take advantage of those numbers to make budgetary cases to say this is an important part of the overall plan.
I love that note of optimism. That would be a good place to end, but I certainly don't want to cut you guys off if you have a final thought for us. All right, well, I have thoroughly enjoyed the discussion. This reminds me some of the elements of our work that I enjoy the most. I think I'm leaving inspired and encouraged that there are professionals like all of you out fighting the good fight and swimming against the current every single day. So yeah, I hope that we continue some of these conversations that we started. I hope we made some good connections between the four of you. And there's certainly things that we're working on here that we'd love to work on you with, because you guys are all bright, articulate, and interesting in unique ways. So thanks for the work that you do on behalf of our teachers and our students, and thanks for being generous with your time tonight. So let's give them a round of applause. Okay, and to our virtual audience, thank you guys for hanging in there with us. I know we had people from multiple states and geographies, and hopefully it was a good experience for you, and you had good audio and video, and we're really grateful that you joined us virtually. So thank you all, and we'll do more things like this in the future. So please join us and make sure you come out for the next one. It'll be hopefully as good as this one, but that is a tall order because this was really strong. Thanks all of you for being here, and have a good evening.
Good evening.
Thank you.
Bye.